She's not really a Hartwell. My mother said it on the porch of the lake house, loud enough for 14 people on the lawn to hear, soft enough that she could deny saying it later. My daughter Sophie was 8 years old. She was holding a plate of strawberry cake. She did not drop the plate. She set it down very carefully on the wicker table next to the railing, like the cake was the thing that mattered. And she walked back across the warm pine boards and put her small hand inside mine. It was the first Saturday in June. The dock smelled like creosote, and the lake gave off that particular green water humidity that lives in the bones of every Carolina summer. My sister Caroline was standing under the white tent on the grass in a cream linen dress, holding her newborn daughter, the one we'd come to celebrate. The string quartet had stopped playing 2 seconds before my mother spoke. The pause stretched long enough for everyone to have heard, and short enough for everyone to pretend they hadn't. Sophie's palm was a little sticky from the cake. She did not cry. She did not look up at me. She looked out at the water, the way her grandfather had taught her to look at the water 2 summers ago, with both feet flat and her shoulders down. My mother smiled at the silence she had created and lifted her champagne flute. "To the next generation of Hartwells at this beautiful lake," she said, "may the house always stay in the family." 14 adults raised their glasses. 2 of them looked at me sideways. None of them looked at my daughter. What my mother did not know, what nobody on that lawn except one man knew, was that the house behind her did not belong to her anymore. It had not belonged to her for 16 months. The deed had been quietly amended on the second-to-last Wednesday of my father's life, and in 47 minutes, the man who had drafted that amendment was going to pull up the gravel driveway in a blue sedan, with a leather folder on his passenger seat, and ask if he could borrow the porch for a moment. My name is Rachel Hartwell. This is the story of the day my mother toasted to a house she no longer owned. Before I tell you what happened on that porch, drop a comment with the city you're watching from, and one word for what it feels like when a grown adult pretends a child does not exist, while the rest of the room stays quiet. I read every one. Make sure you're subscribed. What my mother said next is not the worst thing she said. It's not even close. I'm 38 years old. I'm an estate planning attorney in Charleston, South Carolina. I've spent 14 years writing trusts, drafting wills, and listening to families pretend that money is the thing they were really fighting about. It almost never is. It's always something older and quieter and meaner, and money is just the language they have for saying it. My husband Daniel is an architect. He restores antebellum porches and Civil War-era roofs and old brick warehouses down on the harbor. He is a calm, slow-spoken man with steady hands. We've been married for 12 years. Sophie came to us when she was 6 days old. The adoption was open in the legal sense and private in the personal sense, which means we know her birth mother's first name and we send her a letter once a year, and that is all. Sophie has my husband's quiet smile and my father's curiosity about animals, and a small white scar on her left wrist from a fall off a kitchen stool when she was 3. She is the most patient child I have ever known. She is patient the way her grandfather was patient. My father, Robert Hartwell, called himself Bobby for most of his life. He was a lawyer, like me. He was the kind of lawyer who handled small estates for the families that had been in our county for 200 years. And he handled them honestly, which is rarer than it should be. He died on a Tuesday in February of last year, pancreatic cancer. We had 11 months between the diagnosis and the funeral, which I have since learned is more than most families get. My mother, Vivian Hartwell, was once Vivian Calhoun of the Charleston Calhouns, which she will mention to you in the first 6 minutes of meeting her. She is 66. She runs a hospitality consulting firm out of a renovated carriage house on Trad Street. She wears linen and pearls, and her hair is the color of cold cream. She has never raised her voice in public in her life. She doesn't have to. Her cruelty arrives the way good silver arrives, polished, precise, set on the table next to everything else. My older sister, Caroline, is 41. She has 2 children of her own, Charlotte, who is 10, and James, who is 6, and now a third, the baby being christened at the lake house the day my mother made her toast. Caroline married a cardiologist named Marcus. They live 3 blocks from our mother. Caroline and my mother share a calendar, a hairstylist, a junior league board, and an opinion about everything I have ever done. The lake house sits on a south-facing point on Lake Kiowee, 2.5 hours northwest of Charleston, near the Blue Ridge foothills. My grandfather built it in 1958 out of cedar plank and river rock. The dock is original. My father proposed to my mother on the dock in 1981. He taught me to swim off the end of that dock in 1991. He taught Caroline in 1986. The summer I turned 36, he taught Sophie. He waited for her on the dock every June with a clean towel folded over the railing and a bowl of cut watermelon on the picnic table. For 8 years, in private, my mother has called my daughter the one we adopted. Sometimes Daniel's girl, as though my husband and I came as separate units. Once, at a Christmas dinner I will never forget, she called Sophie the placeholder. She said it to my aunt while I was carrying a turkey from the kitchen. I almost dropped the turkey. I want to say I knew, on that night, that I was eventually going to do what I did at the christening. I didn't. I was a daughter. I was a woman carrying a turkey. I was still hoping my mother might choose us. If you have ever been the parent of a child whose existence makes your own mother uncomfortable, then you already know the shape of the next 8 years. If you haven't, I will try to describe it carefully, because the cruelty in a family like mine is almost never loud. It is almost always plausible. Sophie was born at the Medical University of South Carolina on a hot August morning at 4:13 a.m. When Sophie was placed in my arms, I called my mother from the hallway. It was a few minutes past 5. "Mom, she's here. She's healthy. 6 pounds, 11 ounces. There was a pause on the line. "Oh," my mother said. "That's nice, dear. Caroline has a tennis lesson at 9. I'll come up tomorrow." She came up 4 days later, after we were home. She stayed for 51 minutes. She held Sophie once, for a photograph, because Daniel insisted. She held her the way you hold a porcelain figurine you don't actually want, then she handed her back, said something to Daniel about how brave we were, and left. My father came to the hospital that first morning. He drove up alone. He sat in the rocking chair next to the bed for 3 hours without speaking. When he held Sophie, he wept. He was 62 years old, and I had never seen him cry before. When he finally handed her back, he said, "Rachel, this is the best thing your family will ever do." He meant it. He turned out to be right about all of it, including the word your. When Sophie was 13 months old, my mother threw a first birthday party for my niece Charlotte at the Battery. Catered, petting zoo, hand-calligraphed invitations in the mail. 2 weeks later, Sophie turned 1. My mother sent a card with a $50 bill in it addressed to the Sloan family, Daniel's last name. Sophie's last name is Hartwells Sloan, which I had told my mother 16 times in the previous year. Daniel put the $50 in Sophie's college fund. He didn't say anything. The summer Sophie turned 4, she started learning the violin. By 6, she had a small role in the spring recital, a 4-bar phrase by herself. The kind of thing grandparents come to see. My mother did not come. She had a junior league luncheon, which she had not moved. When I called her that evening, she said, "Oh, Rachel, was that today? I'm so sorry, darling. Caroline Charlotte has her own little concert next weekend at the Spoleto thing. You'll come to that, won't you?" I went to that one. I sat next to my father in the 3rd row. After Charlotte's performance, my mother stood up and clapped with her arms over her head and called out, "Bravo, my darling," loud enough for the whole concert hall to turn. My father did not stand. On the drive home, he asked me very quietly how Sophie's recital had gone. I told him. He nodded. He said, "Send me a video the same day next year, all right?" I sent him a video every year after that for 3 years until he was too sick to watch. Christmas dinner, 2.5 years ago. The last Christmas before my father's diagnosis. I was carrying a turkey from the kitchen to the dining room. My Aunt Marlene was in the hallway holding her wine glass. My mother was sitting at the head of the table. She did not see me. She thought I was still in the kitchen. "You know," my aunt said, "the little one is getting so sweet. Sophie, she's going to be tall, isn't she?" My mother lifted her glass. "Well, she's the placeholder, isn't she, until Caroline has her third." It took me 4 seconds to understand what she had said. I stood in the hallway with the turkey burning my forearms through the towel, and I counted those 4 seconds like I was counting under anesthesia. Then I walked into the dining room, and I set the turkey down at the head of the table, and I sat in my place, and I did not say a word for the rest of the meal. Daniel looked at me twice. I told him that night in the guest room after Sophie was asleep across the hall with my father's old wool blanket pulled up to her chin. Daniel wanted to leave at 5 in the morning. I said no. I said no because of my father. My father, who heard everything in that house and pretended not to. My father, who was already losing weight by then, though we did not know why. My father, who took Sophie out onto the dock at the lake every June and taught her to skip a flat rock 7 times across the water. My father, who called her my Sophie girl when he thought no one was listening. A year before my father died, my mother commissioned a family tree painting from a local artist on Church Street. It was a wedding gift to Caroline for her 10th anniversary. The painting was a watercolor of an oak tree with hand-lettered names on each leaf. It hung in Caroline's foyer for 6 months before I saw it. There were 3 leaves at the bottom for the grandchildren: Charlotte, James, and a 3rd leaf marked Expected, Caroline, May 2024. That was the baby being christened at the lake house. Sophie was not on the tree. She was 8. She had been part of our family for 8 years. There was no leaf for her. Caroline came up behind me in the foyer with 2 glasses of wine in her hands. "Oh," she said, "Mom said it was about bloodlines." She wanted to keep it traditional. I said, "Sophie's last name is Hartwell." Caroline said, "Rachel, please don't make this a thing." I did not make it a thing. I drove home that night. I sat in Sophie's bedroom doorway for almost an hour, watching her sleep with one arm flung over her head. And I made myself a promise I did not yet have any plan for. My father knew. He had known for years. He was a quieter man than my mother, but he was not a weaker man. In the 11 months between his diagnosis and his death, he made a series of small adjustments to his estate that nobody noticed until they did. I want to say I noticed in real time. I didn't. I was busy being his daughter. I was sitting on the porch of the lake house with him in late October, 16 months before that christening, when he turned to me with his hands folded in his lap and said, "Rachel, I'm going to need you to do something for me." "Anything, Dad." "Some afternoon when I'm gone, your mother is going to do something she shouldn't. I don't know what it'll be. I have a guess. Whatever it is, I want you to wait until she does it in front of people. Then I want you to bring Harrison up here, and I want you to let Sophie open the door with her own key. Can you do that?" I said yes. I didn't fully understand what I was agreeing to. I said yes because he was my father and he had asked. He gave me the brass key 3 days later on a leather cord in a small envelope with Sophie's name on it. "It's hers. The cord is from one of my old boots. The key fits the front door and the boathouse. Put it somewhere safe. Don't show your mother. Don't show Caroline." I put it in the bottom drawer of my desk in my office in Charleston. I had not opened that drawer in 15 months. 3 weeks before the christening, my mother sent a group email. The subject line was, "Lake House, June 7. Christening of little Eleanor. The email outlined the schedule for the weekend: the Friday night dinner, the Saturday morning brunch, the 2 p.m. christening service in the meadow, the 3 p.m. champagne reception, the guest list, the string quartet from the Charleston Symphony. Halfway down, there was a paragraph my mother had highlighted in bold. Following the reception, I will be making a brief announcement regarding the long-term plans for the lake house. As many of you know, Robert and I had been discussing this for some time. I have decided to move the lake house into a family trust for Charlotte, James, and our newest Hartwell granddaughter, little Eleanor. Caroline and Marcus will serve as trustees. The house will remain in the family for the next generation. I read it twice. Then I read it 3 more times, slowly. Sophie's name was not in the paragraph. The phrase, "the next generation," had been written by a woman who had 3 living grandchildren and was claiming 2 of them. I forwarded the email to Daniel without comment. Daniel was at his drafting table when his phone buzzed. He read it. He put the phone down. He came down the stairs slowly and stood in the kitchen doorway in his stocking feet and looked at me for a long moment. "She doesn't know," he said. "She doesn't know." "You haven't told her." "I haven't told her." We stood in the quiet kitchen with the dishwasher humming and the cicadas outside. "What are you going to do?" he said. I poured a glass of water. I drank half of it. I set the glass down very carefully so I wouldn't break it. "I'm going to drive up to the lake house," I said, "and I'm going to let her make her announcement. And then I'm going to call Harrison Pike." Daniel was quiet for a moment. He came around the counter and poured himself a glass of water and leaned against the kitchen sink. "You're sure?" "Dad told me to wait until she did it in front of people." "He told you that?" "On the porch, the October before he died." Daniel nodded once. He drank his water. "Okay," he said. "Then we wait." That night, after Sophie was asleep, I went into my office and opened the bottom desk drawer for the first time in 15 months. The brass key was there on its leather cord in the small envelope with Sophie's name on it in my father's careful handwriting. Underneath the envelope was the manila folder Harrison Pike had given me at the reading of my father's will, the file I had thanked him for and taken home and put in the drawer and not opened. I had not opened it because I had been busy being a daughter without a father. I sat at my desk and opened the file. Inside was a certified copy of the amended deed for the lake house, executed on October the 22nd of the previous year, signed and notarized in Harrison Pike's office in downtown Charleston. The deed transferred the property from Robert Hartwell, sole owner, into the Sophia Hartwell Sloan Irrevocable Lake House Trust. I was the sole trustee until Sophie turned 25. Underneath the deed was a second, smaller envelope, sealed, addressed to me in my father's handwriting. I did not open the second envelope that night. I held it in my hands for almost a minute. I put it back in the file. I closed the drawer. I went up the stairs. I sat on the edge of Sophie's bed and watched her breathe for a few minutes. Then I went into our bedroom, lay down next to Daniel, and I told the ceiling, very quietly, that I was going to call Harrison Pike in the morning. I called him at 8:45. Harrison Pike had been my father's attorney for 31 years. He had a small office on Broad Street, a brass nameplate his secretary polished every Friday, and a gray suit for every day of the week. I had known him since I was a child. He answered on the second ring. "Rachel, I was wondering when you'd call." "You knew about the email." "Your mother forwarded it yesterday morning. She wants me to draft the family trust paperwork by the end of next week." "What did you tell her?" "I told her I'd look at it." A silence on the line. Harrison had a particular silence that meant he was deciding how much to say. "I have not started drafting it," he said, "and I will not." "No," Have you opened the sealed envelope, Rachel? No. You should, before the weekend at the lake. I sat at my kitchen table that night, after Sophie had gone to bed, and I opened the sealed envelope. My father's handwriting was uneven. He had written the letter in the last month of his life, but his sentences were as clear as they had ever been. Rachel, if you are reading this, then it has happened, and you are doing what we talked about. The deed is in the file. Harrison knows. The key is yours and Sophie's. Your mother loves the idea of family more than she loves any individual person in it. I have known this for 45 years. I tried for the first 30 to make her see Sophie. I gave up around her 7th birthday. I am sorry I gave up. I was tired. The lake house was the one thing I could give Sophie that your mother could not take. It is hers now. Tell her grandfather wanted her to have a place where nobody could ever say she did not belong. I love you, Dad. I read the letter twice. I went into the bathroom and I cried for exactly 4 minutes, holding the edge of the sink with both hands. Then I washed my face. Then I came back to the kitchen where Daniel had been waiting at the other end of the table without speaking, and I told him what I was going to do. He said, "Tell me what you need." I made a list. I called Harrison on the Tuesday. We met Wednesday afternoon. We met again Friday. By the end of that week, I had 3 things prepared: a certified copy of the amended deed, a notarized statement from Harrison confirming the date of execution and my father's mental competence, and a short typed document explaining the trust in plain English for any family member who happened to be standing on the porch when the news arrived. I asked Harrison if he would drive up to the lake house on the Saturday of the christening. He said yes. Rachel, I have been waiting for that phone call for 15 months. Your father told me in his last week what he thought would happen. He was a careful guesser. The second thing I did was talk to Sophie. I sat with her on the porch swing of our house on a Sunday afternoon, 3 weekends before the christening. She had her violin case open at her feet. The cicadas were loud. The light was gold and slanted through the live oaks. "Sophie," I said, "Grandpa Bobby left you something. Do you remember the lake house?" "Yes." "He left it to you." She was quiet for a moment. She looked at the porch boards. The whole thing? The whole thing. The dock, the boathouse, the porch swing, the bedroom with the green wallpaper. That's my bedroom. Yes, baby, it is. Is Grandma going to be mad? I had imagined 7 versions of the answer. I told her the truth. I think Grandma is going to be very surprised. I think she is going to be upset, but Grandpa Bobby wanted you to know it was yours, and he wanted you to be the person who opens the front door. I took the brass key out of my pocket. I held it in my open palm. The leather cord was old and a little stiff. Sophie reached out and took the key and looked at it. This was his key? He had it on his keychain my whole life. He took it off in October before he died, and he gave it to me to give to you. Why? Because he wanted you to know the house was yours, and he wanted you to be the person who unlocks the door this June. Sophie thought about it. She turned the key over in her fingers twice. Then she slipped the leather cord over her head and tucked the key under her shirt. "Will I have to say something, Mom?" "Only if you want to, sweetie. We can practice." We practiced for 2 weeks. I did not give her a speech. I gave her 2 sentences in case she wanted them. She practiced them in the bathtub. She practiced them under the live oak in the backyard. She practiced them one Tuesday morning while Daniel was making pancakes, and Daniel had to set down the spatula and walk into the other room for a minute. The third thing I did was call my sister. This was the hardest part. I did not call Caroline to warn her. I called her to confirm what I already suspected. I called her on the Thursday before the christening. Caroline sounded harassed. She had 2 minutes. "Mom's going to announce the trust," she said. "She told me last week." "Right." She wants Marcus and me to be the trustees. She's putting the house in Charlotte and James and the baby's name. Right. Rachel, look, I know it's weird, but she owns the house, and she gets to decide what to do with it. You know how she is. I let the silence sit. Caroline, I said, if you were me and Mom was about to leave the family lake house to my children instead of one of yours, would you accept it? There was a long pause on the line. That's different, Caroline said. Why? It just is. Okay, Caroline, I'll see you Friday. I hung up. Daniel was in the kitchen when I came out. She knows what Mom is doing. She does not know what Dad did. Are you going to tell her? No. We drove up to the lake house on the Friday afternoon. Sophie sat in the back seat with her violin case and a small folded paper with the 2 sentences. The pine trees thickened as we left the low country. We pulled into the gravel driveway at 5:47. My mother's white SUV was already there. Caroline's Volvo was already there. My Aunt Marlene's red Lexus was already there. We unloaded. My mother stood in the open doorway in a navy linen dress with her arms crossed loosely at her waist. Rachel, dear, you're late. I said 6, it's 5:47. She smiled. She kissed the air next to my cheek. She did not look at Sophie. She did not look at Daniel. The girls are out on the dock. Charlotte and James are so excited to see the baby cousin. Oysters at 7. Wear something nice. The Calhouns are coming over from Greenville. She walked back into the house. Sophie did not say anything. She walked past me into the front hall and she went up the stairs to the bedroom with the green wallpaper. Daniel followed her with our bags. I stood in the doorway with the cicadas behind me and the smell of pine resin from the porch boards, and I let myself feel the weight of the next 24 hours. Before I tell you what happened on that porch the next afternoon, if you've gotten this far, make sure you've hit subscribe. Because the next 45 minutes change everything that family ever called itself. Friday night dinner was civil. Saturday morning was busier. The caterers arrived at 9, the string quartet at 11, the minister at 12:45, the first guests at 1. My mother moved through the rooms, touching arms and lifting elbows and adjusting napkins. She spoke to Sophie exactly twice that morning. Once, Sophie dear, why don't you go play with Charlotte? Once, Sophie, you have something on your dress. Sophie did not have anything on her dress. She looked down. She smoothed the fabric. She walked away. At 1:15, I sent Harrison Pike a single-word text from the upstairs bathroom. Today. He replied within 40 seconds. On my way. 2 hours and 10. The christening at 2. The reception at 2:40. My mother's toast at 3:15. Harrison's car at 3:30. I had planned it down to the minute. The toast happened the way I had imagined it. My mother stood at the top of the porch steps in her cream dress, champagne flute in her right hand, the lake behind her shoulder. Caroline stood next to her, holding little Eleanor. Marcus stood at the foot of the porch steps in his Saturday loafers. 43 people stood on the lawn in a loose half-moon. My aunts and uncles, cousins from Columbia, the Calhoun contingent from Greenville, 2 old college friends of my father's. The lake was the color of cooled tea. My mother raised her glass. Friends, family, thank you all for being here on this beautiful day to celebrate our newest little Hartwell, Eleanor Vivian Whitmore, named for her great-grandmother and for her grandmother, who is so very proud. A small wave of laughter on the lawn. My mother accepted it as her due. This lake house has been in our family for 3 generations. My father-in-law built it in 1958. Robert and I have spent every summer of our married life on this water. And it has been on my heart, since Robert passed, to make sure this special place stays in the family for the next generation. She paused. She let the moment land. So today, in front of all of you, I'd like to announce that the lake house will be moving into a family trust. The trustees will be my daughter Caroline and her husband Marcus. The beneficiaries will be their 3 beautiful children, Charlotte, James, and our new little Eleanor. The Hartwell name will continue at this lake for another generation, and another after that. I watched the lawn. Daniel was at the back of the half moon, against the porch railing, Sophie next to him on the steps in her white dress. He looked at me once. I gave him a small nod. My mother lifted her glass higher. To the Hartwells, to the next generation, to this house. The guests raised their glasses. To the Hartwells. I did not raise mine. Sophie did not raise hers. Rachel, my mother said, with the very particular smile she used in public. Aren't you going to toast? In a minute, Mom. The guests had begun to chat again. The string quartet started a new piece. I looked down the long gravel driveway. A blue sedan was coming up it, slowly, carefully. The driveway was bumpy in the last 60 feet. The sedan came to a stop in front of the catering van. The driver's side door opened. Harrison Pike stepped out in his Tuesday gray suit. He had a leather folder under his right arm. He looked up at the porch. He smiled at me. It was the smile he had given my father at every 4th of July for 31 years. Harrison, my mother said. The polite hostess smile had not yet faltered. What a lovely surprise. Did Rachel invite you up for the weekend? We have plenty of oysters. Hello, Vivian. Harrison climbed the porch steps. He turned to me. Rachel, is now a good time? It is. Now a good time for what? My mother said. I had practiced my voice for this moment in the bathroom mirror the night before. I wanted it to come out steady. It did. Mom, Harrison has driven up to read a document. Dad signed it 16 months ago. It concerns the lake house. I thought it would be appropriate for him to read it to everyone here, since you've just made an announcement that also concerns the lake house. My mother's smile did not move. Her left hand tightened around the stem of her champagne flute. Caroline stepped forward, holding the baby against her shoulder. Rachel, this is not the time. It's exactly the time, Caroline. Mom just made her announcement. Harrison is going to make his. Harrison opened the leather folder on the small wicker table next to the porch railing. The guests had gone quiet. They had felt the air change. 43 people on a Carolina lawn in the late afternoon sun, and 43 people had stopped pretending they weren't listening. Even the string quartet had stopped between movements. My name is Harrison Pike. I'm an attorney with Pike and Mendel on Broad Street in Charleston. I was Robert Hartwell's attorney for 31 years. On October the 22nd of last year, in my office downtown, Robert Hartwell executed an amendment to the deed of this property. It was witnessed, notarized, and filed with the county clerk in Pickens County. He held up a single sheet of paper. As of October the 22nd of last year, the property at 1147 Cedar Point Road, Lake Keowee, South Carolina, including the residence, the boathouse, the dock, and the surrounding 7.2 acres, was transferred from Robert Hartwell, sole owner, into the Sophia Hartwell Sloan Irrevocable Lake House Trust. The sole beneficiary of the trust is Sophia Hartwell Sloan, age 8. The sole trustee is Rachel Hartwell Sloan until Sophia reaches the age of 25. The lawn was very quiet. Even the cicadas paused. My mother had not moved. The smile was still on her face, but it was no longer a smile. It was a held shape. That can't be right, she said. Robert and I owned this house jointly. You did not, Vivian. Harrison's voice was gentle. Title has been held solely in Robert's name since 1991. Robert and I discussed this in October. The house was your father-in-law's, and he left it to Robert. It was Robert's to direct. He wasn't of sound mind. He was. I have a recorded video statement from him on the day of execution. I have signed declarations from 2 physicians. I have his complete medical chart from the same week. I can provide all of it to any person here who wishes to see it. Caroline. My mother turned to my sister. Her voice cracked on the name, very slightly. It was the only time I had ever heard her voice crack in public. Get Marcus. Caroline did not move. She looked at me. She looked at Sophie on the porch steps. She looked at the lake. She did not move. Caroline, my mother said again. Caroline looked at our mother. Then she looked at the ground. Mom, she said quietly, Marcus is right there. Marcus did not move either. He looked at his loafers. I stepped up onto the porch beside Harrison. Sophie came up the steps behind me, one careful step at a time, in her small black flats. She walked across the porch to the front door of the lake house. She lifted the leather cord from around her neck. She held the brass key up to the lock. She slid it in. She turned the lock to the left. The bolt clicked. The door swung open. The hallway behind it smelled like pine and old quilts and my grandfather's wax polish on the floorboards. Sophie turned around on the threshold. She looked at the 43 faces on the lawn. She held the open door behind her with one hand on the doorframe. She said the 2 sentences we had practiced. This is my house. Grandpa Bobby gave it to me, and you are welcome here as long as you are kind. She looked at my mother for a long moment. My mother did not say anything. The smile was completely gone. Her champagne flute was tilted in her hand at an angle that should have spilled, and didn't. Sophie did not say anything else. She walked back into the front hall and she sat down on the wooden bench by the staircase, the way her grandfather used to sit on that bench when he came in off the dock to take his boots off. And she folded her hands in her lap. I turned to the lawn. Thank you all for coming, I said. The reception is over. Drive safely. There is coffee in the kitchen for anyone who needs to sober up before the road home. I looked at my mother one more time. You spent 45 years, I said quietly, deciding which child counted in your house. Dad spent the last year of his life deciding whose house it actually was. Tonight was the day you found out the answer wasn't yours to give. She did not reply. She could not. I walked past her into the lake house, through the open door my daughter had unlocked, and I closed it gently behind me. The guests left in 11 minutes. The Calhoun contingent from Greenville left first. The catering staff packed up the oysters and the champagne and the strawberry cake in 22 minutes. The string quartet packed up their instruments without speaking. The minister, who had baptized little Eleanor only 40 minutes earlier, walked across the gravel and shook my hand once before he got into his car. He did not say anything. He didn't need to. My mother did not speak to me when she left. She walked down the porch steps without her shoes. She had taken them off for the toast. And she walked across the lawn to the white SUV with her cream pumps in her hand and her champagne flute still tipped at that impossible angle. And she got in the driver's seat, and she did not look back. Caroline drove behind her in the Volvo with the baby and Marcus and the 2 older children. Harrison Pike stayed for 1 cup of coffee on the porch. He sat in the rocking chair my father used to sit in. He told me he had been waiting 15 months to make that drive. He told me my father had asked him, in the last week of his life, what he thought would happen on the day Harrison eventually drove up the gravel road. Harrison had said, "I think you'll be there in spirit, Bobby." My father had said, "I think I will." Harrison hugged me on the porch. He drove back to Charleston in the dark. Daniel and Sophie and I stayed at the lake house for the weekend. Sophie slept in the bedroom with the green wallpaper. I sat on the edge of my parents' bed for a long time on the Sunday morning. I looked at the lake through the window. I cried for the second and last time in the whole story, quietly, into a folded pillowcase, because my father was not in the next room and would never be. 3 months later, my mother filed a contestation of the trust through a Greenville attorney named Sutton. It lasted 4 months. It failed on every count. My mother's deposition lasted 6 hours. The matter was closed on a Tuesday in October. My mother paid the trust's legal fees, which came to $41,300 in a single wire transfer at 11:18 on a Wednesday morning. Caroline did not speak to me for 7 months. In January, she called me from her car in the parking lot of the Whole Foods on East Bay Street. She said she was sorry. She said it had taken her a long time to know what she was sorry for, but she knew now. We talked for 45 minutes. She cried twice. I did not. We have talked once a week since then. Charlotte and James spent a long weekend at the lake house with Sophie in March. Sophie taught Charlotte how to skip a rock 7 times across the water, the way her grandfather had taught her. Charlotte did 6. James did 3. They argued about it on the dock all afternoon. My mother has not been to the lake house since the day of the christening. She is not asked to come. She did not call on Sophie's 9th birthday. She did not call on my 39th. I sent her a Christmas card in December with a photograph of Sophie on the dock. She did not write back. I have stopped checking. The lake house is open every weekend in the summer now. Sophie has invited Tessa from school and a girl named Ruth from down the road, and her cousins Charlotte and James. Daniel has rebuilt the dock. He is sanding the boathouse railing this June. I have started a small scholarship in my father's name at the law school where he studied, 1 annual award for a student doing pro bono estate work for low-income families in the Low Country. The brass key lives on Sophie's nightstand at the lake house now. She wears it on its leather cord on the day she opens the house in May and on the day she closes it in September. I have learned one thing from my father in the 18 months since he died that I am not sure I would have learned any other way. Family is not what the watercolor painter puts on the leaves of the tree. Family is not the name on the Christmas card list. Family is who sits at your table on a Tuesday night when nothing is being celebrated. Family is who carries your bags up a porch when you are tired. Family is who unlocks the door of a house someone has been telling you is not yours and turns around on the threshold and says, "You are welcome here as long as you are kind." That is my story. A brass key, an old envelope, a father who saw what he saw, and an 8-year-old in a white dress who walked across a porch and unlocked the front door of her own house in front of 43 witnesses and did not flinch. If you have ever been the parent of a child whose existence makes someone else uncomfortable, hold the door open for that child anyway. Hold it open every single time. The right people will walk through it. The wrong people will see the door is open and not come in. And that will be the kindest answer you ever receive. If this story meant something to you, leave a comment with 1 word for the relative who never deserved a child like yours. Tell me where you're watching from. Tell me if you would have done the same thing on that porch, or something different. I read every comment. And if stories about quiet strength, hidden documents, and the people who finally get to walk through their own front door resonate with you, subscribe, and stay with us. There is another one coming next week. I'll see you on the dock.